Good afternoon to you. My name is Rajkumar. I'm the Vice Chancellor of the Jindal Global University. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all the new students of the Jindal School of Art and Architecture. It's a very special moment for us to have this commencement lecture today. But we do have commencement lectures every year, and this is the 8th commencement lecture I am attending in this year, the last 3 days. But this is very special because this is the first time we are welcoming the students of the School of Art and Architecture. So I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you. I'm also particularly grateful to Professor Devi for hosting this event here, because this is also a very special room. As architects and as future architects, you will know that when structures are made and they become habitable after a while, there are always this founding moments, and this was the founding moment. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, I invite you to read. There's a plaque outside this room literally on 30th September 2009, nearly 9 years ago. We began the first academic session of the first school of the university, and this was the only room available beyond the 4 classrooms that we had in this entire campus. There was nothing at all, and this was my office and the office of the 10 founding faculty members and the office of the 15 administrative staff. And this was the table. This has not changed. We have not changed the table. Other things have changed in this room, but this was all where it began. So it's wonderful to have the Jindal School of Art and Architecture take off from here. It's obviously a very modest beginnings for the school itself, with a small group of students joining. I can assure you that you will be the most spoiled lot in the entire university, because there's almost a similar number of faculty members. You might end up having a 1:1 faculty-student ratio, and even Harvard and Yale, which boast of, say, a 1:6 faculty-student ratio, doesn't have it. But I also can assure you that it will be only for the first year. I want to mention that you are actually, one of the things that you will experience in this university, and which you're already not, is that you are part of a larger university community. You are going to be meeting and probably interacting with students from the law school, the business school, the international affairs school, the public policy school, the journalism school, and of course the banking and finance school. And in some ways, the opportunity to be part of a larger university with so many diversified disciplines is the unique aspect of our university. Unlike a typical IIT or an IIM or even national law universities or standalone schools of architecture, where you by and large meet people who belong to your own profession, here you have an opportunity to meet and interact with people beyond your chosen field of expertise, and that's a great learning opportunity. So the first thing about our university which I want you to experience is our strong commitment to interdisciplinarity. Even within the school, your courses, your curriculum and programs, I believe, are designed to help you develop imagination. And that's one of the things about every profession, definitely architecture, is your ability to imagine the unthinkable. And those foundational experiences that an undergraduate degree and university ought to provide will shape your future. I mean, I'll ask you a question right away. Do you know what inspired Steve Jobs to do what he did, to design the Mac?
So, it was the other companies that were doing, they were making it too complicated for the users. He did it in a simple way. I mean,
okay, a little bit. One of the things that he learned, which has nothing to do with computing, calligraphy. I mean, the thing that inspired Steve Jobs to design and to become what Apple, to become what it was calligraphy. And so, of course, when he did calligraphy, he didn't do, let me do calligraphy so that I can, build a computer or something like that. But the point is, the opportunity to be inspired beyond your own comfort zone. And that's exactly what any form of interdisciplinarity does to you, not only the courses that this school offers, but also the opportunity to take courses in other schools. The second, which is something which you should be really proud of, is the extraordinary faculty which is part of our global imagination. Global is our university's middle name, and that essentially means that you have people with outstanding qualifications, experience, lived experiences, who have chosen to move into academia. You know, your profession, of course, is a very lucrative profession, and just as law, which is my profession, for those of us who have chosen to leave our professional backgrounds and to devote a good part of our life to be in academia, it's a calling in life that has brought us to do what we are doing. People who are in that area, in that profession, many of them, some people may choose to do something else within the profession, but a good number of them are significantly financially resourceful in doing that. But those who end up coming into academia, particularly on a full-time basis, are people who have made an important choice. And the choice is to be able to educate and empower and inspire young people like you, and that is part of our vision, and we have brought such people from around the world. The Dean himself is an outstanding architect and scholar. Did you meet him? Okay, great. So he's of course going to be joining us back in the next several weeks. The Vice Dean, Jaideep, you know him, and again, outstanding qualifications, experience. All our faculty members, each one of them, they have absolutely amazing set of qualifications, experiences in India, around the world, people who are from other parts of the world. That is what JGU and JSA is all about. Of course, we hope to provide those experiences for you while you're here. I'm sure you will be being part of exchange programs as well as study abroad programs, hopefully even arrangements in different parts of the world. All of that will be something which JGU and JSA will provide. The third aspect of our university is our strong commitment to diversity and pluralism in all its forms and manifestations. As you study here, you will recognize the fact that there are students from 29 different countries, states in India, also other Indian territories. There are faculty from over 26 countries in the world. There are, of course, students from several countries in the world who are also here. And so, to be part of an institutional ecosystem which has so much of diversity, it will be a shame if you don't make the best use of it. I hope you will interact with people beyond your states, from where you come from, beyond your language comfort zone, which you're used to, beyond the culture and social and economic backgrounds that you're used to. Because one of the most difficult things for us is, when we grow up later in life, is to be able to engage with people who are different from us. And universities are fantastic places for you to engage with people who are different from us. And so I hope you will make the best use of it as well. Lastly, I want to say that BARC is a professional program. I know there are students from the 3-year BA as well. And the idea for both these students, and I know both of you are in this group, is that these years are important formative years for you to get the best of the educational experiences and learning experiences and even inspiring opportunities. They will form the foundation for your future. Make the best use of it. Beyond the academic engagement that happens within your school, make the best use of the campus. There are so many facilities that this fully residential campus community provides. We have actually rejected and regretted many students who could not join us because for us, residence is compulsory, and we expect all our students to live on campus. And so because of it, some students may not be able to prefer that option. So we pride in the fact that we are a fully residential university. That also means that I hope you will make the best use of it, everything here. But then there's something about you, this group, as opposed to any other group, because this university is a kind of a laboratory for you to be able to look at the architecture, to be able to look at what we have done and how we can further improve it. I know Mr. Lall, our commencement speaker, is going to speak about sustainability. What are we doing in relation to energy use? To what extent our own architectural model can help us or has helped us in doing what we've done. All these things are very intrinsically interesting questions for everybody, but for you, you will see this in a different lens. And so that becomes an interesting conversation because I don't know how many of you know, but a French architect named Stéphane Pommier designed this campus. He has been receiving awards for this campus. And so what is so unique about this campus? And what is so unique about the new student housing that we're building? These questions for other students is different from you. And so in a way, you have an opportunity to see through in the next 4 to 5 years the extraordinary changes that are going to happen on campus and how that will also help you understand your own discipline better. Lastly, I want to say that we are, as a university, we are deeply committed to ensuring that there is absolutely no ragging or any other form. Ragging is a very awkward word, but what we really mean is that any form of physical or other forms of violence is absolutely not acceptable. We have zero tolerance towards it. As first-year students, if you ever are facing any such situation, including issues surrounding sexual harassment, do let us know. We have institutional mechanisms within the university which addresses that. Both your own faculty members, your vice team, the registrar, and myself as vice chancellor, we are here to ensure safety and security of all of you. And if you are facing any such discomfiture in any form, do not hesitate to reach us so that we can quickly respond to it effectively. Lastly, I have a great pleasure in welcoming Mr. Ashok Lall, the principal architect of Ashok Lall and Associates, New Delhi. Formally, I will request Jaideep to introduce Mr. Lall, but in my brief conversation with Mr. Lall, what I learned is his larger commitment towards the broader discipline of architecture, ensuring a certain degree of sustainability, but also promoting an intergenerational equity when it comes to built environment. And that's an important conversation that we need to have. The future of cities is something which I have asked Jaideep for us to think about it. There is a need for leadership in this area. I think India is going to see urbanization in proportions, in scope that the world has never seen before. We have seen it in China, but the next will be India and Brazil and South Africa and many other parts of the world will follow. And so if we can get some of those things right, or to say it alternatively, if you can be at the vanguard of making those changes and creating a new vision, a new imagination for the future of architecture in India and the world, then one of the goals and purposes of the school will be achieved. I'm grateful to Mr. Lall for taking out time from his precious schedule to visit our campus and spend this time with us. Since I have these different roles to play, I will slip away shortly, but it's a pleasure to see all of you, and I will come and see you in your class, and we will spend more time together. I also want to take this moment to welcome the new faculty members of the Jindal School of Art and Architecture who have joined, some of whom have been with us for the last several months, who have been in the efforts to create the curriculum, the courses, recruitment of the faculty, but also admission of students. I'm grateful to all of them for their leadership in institution building. With those few words, I now invite Professor Dr. Devi Prasad, Vice Dean of the Jindal School of Art and Architecture, to introduce the speaker and the JSA.
Thank you so much, George. Always good to hear from you. Welcome, Professor Lall. He mentioned that I still call him Professor Lall. He's no longer a professor, but I will insist on doing so. There is so much one has learned from you, right? So I will two parts to my little introduction. First to the JSAA, and then to Professor Lall. So this is, as you all know very well, the first year that we are beginning. We have big dreams, big hopes for this school. We have imagined this school as perhaps a unique school of architecture in the country. Its guiding ideals, I think, is an understanding that architecture is a form of knowledge that emerges out of practice and out of making, right? And in the act of building, I think that is something we want front and central to our school. I think a second ideal that has been guiding the way we have imagined the school and the way we have thought of the curriculum, the way we have thought of our infrastructure, all of that, has been that fundamentally each student should be able to chart their own trajectory, right? And we want to have a curriculum in which folks can figure out what is it, which part of the built environment, which part of architecture do they find themselves getting interested in, and they can begin to hone their expertise in those areas, right? Which is one of the reasons why we have come up with a whole lot of minors for all of you to choose from. We have about 16 prefigured minors, right? Too many to list here, but I'll just list a few. There's, for example, you could potentially do a minor in law and do a major in architecture. You could, excuse me, you could also do a minor in real estate and construction management, take classes in the business school. In fact, I did not know this, but yesterday when Raj announced our new deputy controller of examination, I was surprised to learn that he actually had a bachelor's in architecture. Immediately I called him and said, "Why are you not teaching in our school?" Right? So what are you doing in the business school? So then we said, okay, we've got to think of classes which are cross-listed, as well as classes that the minor can now come around from his expertise, right? So this is the way. It's interesting for all of us. Also, we are discovering so many colleagues we have, right, who we can all work with. The idea is also an interdisciplinary form of knowledge. A third ideal that has constantly sort of guided this school is the notion that fundamentally, as an architect, you have to work and understand, like I said, the act of building, the act of making. Too long, this has been our experience, and Professor Lall and I were talking about this while we were having lunch, is that in India, architecture has become too much about paper and doing things in theory rather than fundamentally concentrating on the act of building. As you will realize as you progress through your coursework, a lot of it, especially in your foundation year, you'll be working with your hands. Your hands are going to become your tools. You're going to build everything and learn from that, right? Right? With that, I will shift gears and introduce Professor Lall. I know him for a very long time, and almost 12, 13 years now, maybe longer than that. And what stuck with me always was I met him while I was doing my own PhD work, and I was a research assistant associate at the TVB School of Habitat Studies, of which he was one of the founding members. And I was known all around the school as this man who went around with this little ethnographic notebook, this red notebook in which I used to note down everything. And some people used to run away from me, like, oh, he's come again to ask us all kinds of questions about architects and architecture, right? Because that's what I was studying, what doing. But what struck with me one day when he sort of called me and he said, this entire discipline is about one thing. And he said, it's about service. Now, I'd heard it all about being a profession. And then suddenly, one day he said, basically, Joydeep, this is all about service and seva. Providing service to people. And we architects tend to forget that very often. And that really stayed with me. That stayed with me because it was a completely different conception of the idea of a profession, for some reason. Because all along, in all the readings that I was doing, because I was looking at the history of the profession, I was constantly looking at how a bunch of people who called themselves architects fought to call themselves a profession. And then here suddenly, I saw it being reinvented as a service, right? A service, a seva that we provide to people. And then, so, we got talking, and then finally, I managed to pull together a little kind of a round table in which I had him speak, where the title was, "Ye architect kya cheez hai?" What kind of a thing is an architect, right? And so we came to a very interesting conclusion. I remember one of the other professors who was there sort of stood up and said, Joydeep, there are as many kinds of architects as there are stars in the sky. And in a sense, that I realized was kind of the ethos that both TVB and all of the people who were there to, were trying to pull together. So since then, it was an interesting kind of an association, developed with him. He's one of the foremost experts in the country on the question of sustainability. And what was also interesting was his idea of sustainability. Again, sort of remember reading an article by him, which he had looked at how
Gandhi's ideas and that question of sustainability could come together, which was, I think, had a very interesting and a profound sort of experience and influence on my own work in some ways. We then ended up working on a competition together a few years ago, 2011-12, I believe it was, which was trying to, which sort of was a culmination of a long exercise with urban villages in New Delhi. And this was specifically some work around the Khirki village in Delhi, for those of you who know that. You know, Professor Lall's, the team won a prize for that. A lot of, but apart from these big things, what was really interesting is that, and sometimes if we ever get a time, I'll take you all, and if you permit, that is, take you to his house. It is one of the most beautifully designed and detailed houses that I have ever seen. What is interesting and what really is brilliant about his work, both at a very small and at the largest scale, is the kind of attention to detail and to materials that his work brings. And so when I asked him about that one day, he said, well, the idea is to see not how buildings look when they are young, but how well do they age. And so that, again, so the idea of all of these things I thought were very interesting, and I'm going to stop now and ask him to talk about a lot of these, because I think they're very central to how we understand this very environment that we live in, right? This built environment, the buildings we make, the cities we inhabit, the towns that we live in, all right? So without much further ado, I would ask him to speak.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jaydeep, and thank you so much, Raj. I think you said it all very little for me to add to what you're all saying. I was wondering whether I should connect this. Okay, what I understand is that there are two courses that are sharing the first foundation year at the beginning of the session. Now, there's one is called B.Arch, Architecture, Preparing for Professional Architecture. The other one is called, what's it called?
The BA Built Environment.
The BA in Built Environment Studies, right? Is that what you're saying? So it's in a sense, I say that this is a very novel approach, but it is very strategic, because what it does is it puts the two scales of activity together. When you talk about the built environment, you're obviously looking at something at a very large scale. You're looking at, the complexities of people coming together to form settlements in towns and cities and so on. And what the impact of all of that is, and how do these things work, and what's involved in getting them to work, and how life is actually livable at that scale. So you see this whole thing about the built environment. And within that built environment, there is this individual acts of building that goes on, which is what we ascribe to the architect, the person who's designing those little bits like this university or a house or something else, or a railway station and so on. So there are these elements of construction that happen, and then the architect is there. Just by recognizing these two sets, or these two sets, and putting them in context of one another, I think this is a beginning of a strategic learning. Because there's no built environment without the individual acts of building. There's no individual act of building which has to do with the built environment at large. And it is when you understand these two things coming together strategically, and that is what begins to fire imagination, then you are looking towards a wonderful future. So I'd like to congratulate you on this thing, first of all. What I thought I would do is perhaps take you through my own evolution from my days as a student of architecture to somewhere where I am today. Just a quick look at that, and try to explain to you how it all happened. And that is so my journey is another way of putting together this issue of the built environment and the architect, and giving it what you might call a theoretical framework, which I have called 3 dimensions in multiple realms. Okay? So here's a problem. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, I can do it from here. I can do it from here, can I?
Yeah.
Great. I don't know what this diagram is called. Anybody know what it's called? It's got a name. I don't know what it is. But this is a vase, a Greek vase. Or is it 2 people looking at one another? It's obviously both. But the curious thing is that I can only behold one meaning at a time. I just cannot hold the 2 meanings together simultaneously. It just doesn't happen. I tried my very best. I can't do it. It's either I see a vase or I see 2 people, but I can't see the both of them together. It's a curious thing. And it's obviously something to do with the human condition, that we cannot grasp and be aware simultaneously of several dimensions which obviously impact our work. We're not able to do it. So that's the question that I'm asking. What do we do then? And what are these dimensions? And how do we overcome this problem of not being able to see those all dimensions at the same time? What do we do? Now, what happens in the built environment? Let's imagine that these 2 figures with their eyes open are imagining a place to be made. They are the architects. The conceptualizing is happening. And in the field that they've imagined, which is the vase, they're putting their imagination into this vase. All kinds of things happen inside that. And inevitably, what happens inside that is not what they thought they wanted to have. It's not the same thing. It's much more complex than they imagined. So, the ambition, the imagination, the possibility that the architects in their leaping ambition have, like the setting up of a new capital for Amravati, or it has been done in Chandigarh or New Delhi or whatever, or making some very grand gesture somewhere, they have a certain idea of what the end thing is like in its totality. They kind of conceived it as a fixed object in their head. But the reality is always much more complex than that. And it takes on its own life. You just cannot determine things. They will take on their own life. And so, the coming of the city, the coming of the built environment, the becoming of the built environment is the space between the imagination of those who put down the infrastructure for that built environment to come up, the imagination of the Vice Chancellor in setting up the university for that matter, all right? And what the participants and the actors within that whole place begin to do. It's a result of that, okay? So it's that interaction. So I was looking at the old city of Shahjahanabad in the last picture. Now I'm looking at the creation of Lutyens' Delhi. I'm looking at it from the sky, just as the way Mr. Lutyens would have looked at the master plan of the new city of Delhi with this perfect circle and Connaught circles and so on and so forth. And then I'm looking over the city of Shahjahanabad. It's incredibly dense fabric with all kinds of people doing their own thing within that fabric. All right, and this goes on. So I just want to draw our attention to the fact that to the question as to what is the role of the strategic imagination of the designer and the architect. What is the role, given the complexity of life, the way it pans out? This is how it started out. When I was a student of architecture in the Cambridge University many, many, many years ago, we studied the great masters of architecture. architecture. These are all people with grand imagination. There's a gentleman on the right-hand side is a German guy called Mies van der Rohe, and he's got his favorite building in front of him. The guy on the left-hand side is from America, Frank Lloyd Wright. He was also a great imaginer. I mean, he was the guy who knew what to do for the rest of the world, and also the guy in the middle with his circular glasses. And you'll find that many famous architects today have chosen to wear such circular glasses so that they identify with this guy. That's Le Corbusier who did the Capitol buildings.
We need to get you a new pair of.
Yeah, I think. No, you don't have the circular ones yet.
I don't have them yet.
But you'll get them soon. Yeah. So, yeah. So we studied these guys, and we prized their strategic thinking and their imagination for a new world order, and they thought that the word architect came with a capital, very big capital A, as a people who can determine what the world is going to be like. We studied these guys at that time. And we studied their works, beautiful buildings and all the stuff that went into the buildings, and their town plans and God knows what else. We studied everything. This was a famous building in New York City, which was designed by Mies van der Rohe. The previous one was a house designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And this is in Chandigarh, the assembly building designed by Corbusier. And we studied all of these. And we thought that the purpose of the practice of architecture was to produce cultural artifacts, objects and places which should be celebrated as possessions of societies. These are the cultural artifacts that we are proud to have this in our city, we are proud to have this in our campus, we are proud to have this something. So it became that the idea was to produce cultural artifacts, and so it was really an aspect of design, and it had to do with the theory of art, the theory of aesthetics, the theory of the language of the aesthetic languages of architecture and so on. And we studied this in great depth and even learned somehow to imitate some of these guys, right? Then came a time, you come back for a holiday, back to India, and you travel around and you see what's going on in different parts of the world, and you see these old buildings built in the 17th and 18th centuries, and you say, oh my God, what incredible stuff this is. And then you suddenly say, well, this is also cultural artifacts, but developed from a different kind of tradition. This kind of grows from the ground, using the materials immediately at hand, and such love and care and so much time and energy spent in working out every detail and embellishing every surface and enjoying every moment of it as if it's like a prayer and a song, and you keep doing it. And this is something that you learned, and you said, oh, but they do it differently in other parts of this country. This is going south, that was in Jaisalmer, and this is somewhere in the south. And they do it differently over here. My gosh, how do they do it differently? Why do they do it differently? Obviously, there's something peculiar about this place, and something peculiar about what they've learned to do in terms of shelter. And this is a palace. And this is how it is inside. See how the bright sunshine is modulated and there's a glow of light inside, and how timber is the principal construction material. And so here's another tradition that has grown. So it is tied to climate, to material, to location, to a history of a people. And then you jump again, oh my God, you go to another part of, go back to the Architectural Association School of Architecture, and you say, and then you get the new crazy guys. There are all these pictures on the top right hand side. They are talking about a new technological world, where there are big machines, and these machines are crawling all over the city, and they've got these tubes hanging out, and there are plug-ins, and you can, so they imagine that this massive production of technological objects is going to be the new kind of city. And they were thrilled with this possibility, absolutely thrilled with this possibility. And we got drawn into that also at that time, right? But Where is it? This is the Archigram studio, Peter Cook. None of this is built, huh, by the way. This is not built. It's like, "Arey, aisa bhi ho sakta hai," you know, this can happen. Wow, and we'll say, wow. And yeah, so these are heroes who would perform on the stage in front of us, and we'd say, wow. But in the last year, this is another Cedric Price is also amazing thinker, who put in this simple idea, and he said, you know what buildings are? He's talking about modern technological buildings. They're actually services systems. They are ways of holding stuff up, bringing in light and bringing in air, and enabling you to do various things. That's all they are. There's nothing to do with what they look like and what the aesthetic is or anything. They're just systems. They're life support systems. That's all it is. And he developed a whole approach to how these systems can afford a great deal of variability and flexibility and adaptability to changing needs of society. But then I came to the 5th year, where I joined what was then called the Tropical Studies Department. This gentleman here is Otto Königsberger, who was the head of that department. And Otto Königsberger was wearing the same hat at that time as Joydeep is wearing over here, setting up a new department. Okay? And this was a course which said that, oh boy, you know, there's a whole part of this world which is not looking forward right now to the great technological leap which the Archigram studio showed. They are developing countries where quality of life is not that good and buildings are not that wonderful, and we have to now find ways of producing built environments that can be built from the available resource and can produce a much better way of life. And he, in that 1 year, this was a postgraduate course, there were people from all over the world who came to attend that course, and in that 1 year, he changed the course of my life. He said, you are going to go back to your home and you're going to be a partner in the development of your society. You're going to be a partner in the development of your society. You're going to be a development practitioner. So the first guys were makers of cultural artifacts. And here is something new which says that when so much is happening, so many homes to be built, so many towns to be built, so many schools to be built, all this is like from the raw ground we're going to develop as a society. You're going to be part of that. So you're going to contribute to the development of your country. You're going to be a development practitioner. So be careful of what you do and how you do, because that's your mission in life. And completely changed me. So instead of staying on in the UK or looking for a job out there in some of the best practices, blah, 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 I went to Singapore and then eventually came to Delhi and I started working here. So now, slight change of tack. This was the course that is called Climatology, which you will probably be coming across shortly.
No, we've not.
Or sometime in the near future, something called Climatology. This course was developed at the Tropical Studies Department of the AA, and it is late 60s. All right? And you can see, it was simply saying, okay, bhai, how can you make buildings more comfortable using the available materials at hand by understanding the physics of buildings and their relationship with the outdoor climate, the sun, the weather, the temperatures, the air. By understanding that scientifically, how can you make buildings more comfortable? And it's just a matter of configuration and design. It's nothing to do with any, there's no other magic to it. It's simple ways of doing that. That was climatology. And that was at the beginning, 1968, is the first war, is the first Gulf War, oil war, where people were trying to corner the oil resources of the Middle East, and there was a big fight over it. And suddenly the prices of oil went up, and there was going to be a fear of shortage of oil. And that's when you said that, oh, there's not going to be any oil. If there's no oil, how do you get your electricity? How do you heat the buildings all over the North America, Western Europe, Northwestern Europe, where heating was a big problem? If oil became short, and you're dependent on oil to heat all your buildings, then what are you going to do? So people started talking about solar passive architecture, bioclimatic design, low energy architecture. This whole thing about energy efficiency and low energy architecture is a consequence of that history. And when I left as a student into the profession, I had been introduced from this direction into the profession. All right, that was what was happening at that time. And then this theory, over the years, gets developed to low energy architecture, and then in the 90s, the United Nations gets together in Brazil and they come out with a whole thing about, there's a big document which talks about sustainable development. And sustainable development is the idea, is asking the question, how can we improve our quality of life without despoiling the environment? Retaining the resources of our environment such that they are available for the future generations. How can we do that? What's the way of doing it? They said that because they could see at that time that the way the environment was being exploited is not going to leave anything available for future generations. Whether it is the forest that was being cut down or oil that was being completely used up and many other resources that were being consumed at such a huge rate that this is going to happen. So, environmentally sustainable architecture was born out of that. And then, lastly, you begin to say, architecture for sustainable development. Okay? So, what is the architecture for the development of a society which will be sustainable and environmentally responsible? Okay? And that's where we are at, more or less, today. So here's the third element. How does it go? Here we are. So remember that first diagram, I couldn't see I couldn't see the two images together. I couldn't comprehend them simultaneously together. Either it was a vase or it was two people looking at each other. Now here it is, architecture as a cultural artifact. Oh, I love the university buildings over here. It's a cultural artifact. Look at the way the steel moves and the glass is related and the patterns are formed and So there's a cultural artifact and there's a joy in it, there's an exhilaration in it, and there's a sense of place and all of that. But then I ask the next question. What about architecture's development practice? How does that architecture then become something which can be used, adopted by the general populace for their own development? Has it found those solutions? I'm finding it very difficult to put the two things together. And the last one, this needs a little bit more explanation. That architecture is also environmental stewardship. Stewards are people who look after things. All right, stewards look after things generally. Now, because we are so many of us, right? What's the population of India today? 1.3 billion. All right. I don't know what China is. 1.5, 1.6, something like that. There are so many of us. There's too many of us, and we are growing all over the world. In Africa, they're still pumping away, growing like anything, And each one of us wants a better quality of life. And what does a better quality of life mean? I want a nice house, I want it to be comfortable. Earlier, I could do with one house, and if I fell ill, I'll just lie on my bed and someone will come and look after me. But now, no, I have to go to the clinic. Not only do I have to go to the clinic, I have to go to the hospital to be looked after. So I need not only my bed, I need a bloody hospital also. Right? And in the old days, in the afternoon I'll just go out and run about and kick a few balls about, etc., and be quite happy and healthy. But no more. I need a swimming pool, damn it. And I need a gym. And in the old days, on the weekends, we will go to the nearby orchard and eat a lot of mangoes and come back, and that would be a holiday. But no, I need a resort and I need a 5-star. So the demands of this growing population looking for a good quality of life are phenomenally large. And that is in direct conflict with what the environment can offer sustainably. So how the hell do we look after that? That's a very, very big question. Okay? So I won't go into the details of this, but I just wanted to introduce you to these 3 things. How difficult it is to hold all of these 3 together in your head while you are working as an architect or working as an urban practitioner, somebody who is engaged with the making and management of cities, in whatever capacity it might be. A designer and maker of the built environment, whether it's the tiny end or the big end. These 3 things will always coexist, and we have to be able to see how to bring them all together in our practice. Okay, I'm almost done. You know this gentleman? Mr. B.V. Doshi. He just got the Pritzker Prize. He's 90 plus now. And I think the guys who are, Pritzker Prize is the most prestigious global prize for architects. Right? It's the biggest thing you can get. And Doshi was given it, I believe, because those guys up there realized, boy, he's not going to be there much longer. And he absolutely deserves it better now than regret later. So they gave him the prize because he absolutely deserves it. Because he is one of those philosophers and thinkers in the field of architecture who was able to think of all these 3 things together. Very few people have been able to do that, and he's one of them. And in that sense, not a servant of society, but in service of society at large. Do you know this gentleman? Mr. Hafiz Contractor. Well, Mr. Doshi may have got the Pritzker Prize, but Mr. Hafiz Contractor has bagged all the projects. He's the biggest architect in the country. He's the biggest guy. He's got all the muscle power that you need in the world. So here's a big dilemma. Is the profession of architecture or the professions of the built environment, I'm correcting myself, you're right, absolutely right, are the professions of the built environment businesses or services? What are they? Right? The way the world is structured today, you're forced into a business mode. Whereas what your heart tells you to do is to work with the service mode. And so this is one of those great dilemmas that we will have to confront. Oh, I don't know why I put this one up. But let me just go through this quickly. I don't know if you got another 15 minutes?
Yes.
You got all right. This gentleman on the right-hand side is Devi Prasad, who was also on the academic board of the TVB School of Habitat Studies once upon a time. He has now passed away. A Gandhian, a potter. And what I learned from him, from the art of pottery, was that here is such a simple skill, a simple process. All that you do as a potter is that you define the profile of an object from a lump of clay, right, as it is turning on the wheel. The wheel turns and you shape the clay with your hands, and in doing that with your hands, your entire body, your mind, your imagination that is completely engaged with the making of that small clay object all right, with your hands, and all you're defining is the precise profile it must achieve. And you can produce a million varieties and inflections of this thing and enjoy the art. So one lesson I learned from this was there is a great value in elegance of means. कितने simple तरीके से, कितने सीधे तरीके से हम कितनी बढ़िया या अद्भुत चीज़ें बना सकते हैं. It is easy to load complexity upon complexity and difficulty upon difficulty and say, look what I've done. But it is great to do some things with simple gestures and produce absolute wonders. And that has become one of the guiding posts of what I call good architecture. You know, simple means incredible effect, incredible value. And one tries to do this. I mean, we designed a chair which is trying to achieve that kind of thing. Simple means, but very elegant, and using different materials together. Let's not just dwell on this. Here's another thing. This is about going back to cultural artifact. I don't know if you know these images. Anybody know these images? On the left-hand side is Alhambra Palace in Spain. This is when Arabs were ruling, or they were, I don't know, they were ruling in that part of Spain for a time, and this is one of the palaces that was built. And it is the most incredibly intricate but beautifully conceived simple courtyard with these slender columns, and the way the stone is carved and all of that. To me, it is like when you take a rosary, when you take a mala, and with each bead you say the same word, but each time you say the word, it has a slightly different meaning. It cannot be the same as the previous one. And so it's called jap. And so to me, this kind of concentration and repetition of the same object with slight inflections is it's very meditative and very beautiful. So this is one kind of way of raising the spirit through engagement with material. On the right-hand side is the house of Luis Barragan. Luis Barragan is a Mexican landscape architect. He was a devout Catholic, and this is his house, and there's a big window looking out from his main room out into his garden. The garden has grown like a tropical forest. You can't walk through it. You can't walk through the garden. It's so dense. But that's his garden. And there's a cross that looks out into the garden. And the walls are absolutely plain, and the furniture is absolutely simple. It's really that you dematerialize everything. You remove any kind of superficiality down to the basics, down to the core. And again, it lifts your spirit. It lifts your spirit. Now the two sensibilities, the one on the left-hand side and one on the right-hand side, are so different. And in Hinduistic thought, the one on the right-hand side is what we would equate with the Shaivite sensibility, more stoic, more austere. All right? And on the left-hand side is the Vaishnav sensibility, which is Krishna Leela and Sringar and all of that, right? But both of them ultimately serve the same end. So this is where I think each one of us will find our own kind of expression. I won't go into this. I want to just quickly move on to, sorry.
Please tell us
What? Oh. Well, this is also very inspirational. It's like saying, just as I was telling you about the Havelis of Rajasthan or the palace in Kerala, we all have histories. This is a painting by Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, which he calls Mappa Mundi. There are several of these paintings, and they are maps of the world. And what you see on the top right hand side is Kabir. On the left bottom side is Angel Gabriel, bringing the news of Christ to be born. On the right hand bottom is a dervish in a dance, a Sufi dancer. On the top left is Majnu, a blind Majnu, about to enter the city looking for his Layla. So we can never ever get away from our own histories and the myths that actually give us so much, there is so much impetus, they represent many truths about ourselves. And this will also find its way in the expression of your architecture. It's about the authenticity of your own expression. It's not about doing things the way someone else is doing. It's about finding yourself in whatever you're doing. And that's the meaning of this picture. It's refusing. So this is the house that Joydeep has visited, where we stay. All right. Just some. All right, this is now the last shot. Does this look familiar? In a sort of way. I mean, you go to Gurgaon, you go to Greater Noida, you go to... It begins to look like this now. There are some very big buildings and very tall buildings, and there's a messy stuff somewhere in the middle. And this is what our cities are becoming. This is what it is. I mean, I'm asking myself the question, what's right and what's wrong about it? Why is it the way it is? And, let me just TV school. Okay, these are the last two statements. This is where we are today. If you look at the country as a whole, if you look at the globe as a whole, if you look at the country as a whole, and if you look at most of our cities today, there is 5% of us who are very wealthy. And there's about half of us in the cities and in the countries who are marginalized, struggling with life, trying to make it better. And there's the rest in between, who are what we call the middle class, who are looking forward to becoming like the wealthy gang, right? We all want to be Shah Rukh Khan or something. And you can see on the left-hand side there are tall buildings in the pink column. There are these very tall buildings from different parts of the world and different times in history. This bunch on the left-hand side have very high carbon footprints and have excessive consumption. If we were all to aspire to that level of consumption, we will need 6 globes with all the environmental resources to make that happen. Okay? On the other side, the half of the population actually has very low carbon footprint, but they suffer from terrible environmental degradation, pollution, not access to water, sewerage not there, etc., disease, and all the environmental degradation that you can think of. And our job is to see if we can move the world like this by raising the living standards with moderation in consumption of the struggling bottom, by having enabling methods and policies, by reducing the levels of consumption and the carbon footprint of the very wealthy, by having constraining methods and policies, or more, I don't know, some tricks. And somewhere in the middle, for all of us, 95% of us, we should find sustainable lifestyles and urban systems into which we can see our futures. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Please.
That was really nice for you to share your experience with us. One of the things I have in mind was your work a whole lot with the sustainability, and as you said, for the final year, your final year actually motivated you to take sustainability as a practice. And if you see sustainability then and sustainability now, is there a difference between the two of what you used to think sustainability was then and sustainability now is? Can you?
Yeah, in some ways, yes. It's different in the sense that I think the understanding of the issues has improved a lot, and the theory and practice has also grown enormously over the years. Let me give you an instance of it. We now know, in concrete terms, the relationship between the built environment and climate change. Climate change hadn't occurred at that time. This realization came much later. And it took some time for scientists to come to a consensus out of a lot of study, consensus on the fact of climate change, and also to be able to, first of all, they were able to see that temperatures are rising globally, and they were able to see the period during which these temperatures rose globally, and they were able to then determine the causality of this temperature change. It had to do with what is called the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which trapped the heat of the sun and therefore caused the rise. So how does this accumulation happen? And there were several factors, but one of them has to do with the production of the built environment and the management of the built environment. All building materials that we utilize go through a process of transformation from their natural state into a building material. Okay? So this thing that is separating us from the outside, which we call glass, was originally sand, and it became glass by being heated to huge high temperatures using energy, and this energy would have been either oil or coal. And so in the production of glass, we have released a whole lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This structure that is holding us up here, which you can see the skeleton of it outside, is made out of steel. And the steel is also conversion of the natural ore which is excavated from the ground by a process of intensive heating and then rolling and shaping and pressing, and God knows what else happens to it, to become a building material. So in the production of steel, we release a whole lot of carbon dioxide. Cement is like that. But on the other hand, timbers require very little. I mean, if you're talking about timbers, require very little energy to convert from the natural state to a construction stage. Grasses require very little, and so on. So we now know that the production of buildings themselves, if they are intensive in the use of those materials in whose production we have to expend a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, is a serious contributor to climate change. Right? So this kind of realization is relatively recent. Another realization is relatively recent, is that we are no longer happy with just a ceiling fan to give us comfort in today's climate. I mean, I could just switch on a ceiling fan, maybe taken off my shirt and be in my bare chest, and we could have had the same talk, actually. We might have just, had a kamcha to wipe our sweat a little bit, but we could have done it. Or we're no longer happy with that. The first thing that became universally air conditioned, was a motor car, believe it or not. Then it was, even before that, it was a cinema, then the restaurant, the hotel, then the shop, and now it has to be the workplace as well as the home. Right? Now the prediction is that if all the homes that are to be built in the next 2 decades for the growing population in the cities, even if 10% of the area of those homes was to go into air conditioning, we will have to triple the amount of energy we produce in the country. And thereby, if that energy is produced using carbonaceous fuels, oil, gas and coal, then you're contributing to climate change. So that kind of realization is recent, and the work done to counter this also recent. So I think there's a lot of better understanding of sustainability, technical understanding of sustainability. Also a lot of work has been done in how to respond to it in strategic ways, especially for developing societies. So yeah, it's very different now, and I think we are much better informed. Yeah.
Any other questions, thoughts? Yes, sir.
So,
Introduce yourself.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks a lot for coming here, sir. I'm Shaurya, and my question is, how does an urban practitioner or an urban architect meet the demands of the urban citizens as well as he follows the terms of the sustainable development?
Yeah, I'll talk to you after 5 years when you finish the course. You'll tell me. You'll tell me the answer. Yeah, that's exactly the question. That is so well put. I really congratulate you. You hit the nail on the head. This is why we are here, to solve that riddle. The way I tend to see, there's an old adagio which says, think global, act local. Think global, act local. The premise is that it is the accumulation of all individual acts that creates direction of our development as a collective. एक चीज़ हम करते जाते हैं और सब जुड़ के उसका एक बहाव बन जाता है. That it takes you in a certain direction. So when each one of us is aware of what is the implication of our individual act on the collective, on the greater environment, then you're doing what you're saying. So if we were talking about, Raj was talking about the imagination, and one of the things is that we learn how to develop our imagination. I have a take on this question of imagination. Yes, we do need to learn to exercise our imagination, and there are many techniques by which we learn to exercise our imagination, and our faculty are the people who know how to how to bring those techniques into your world. Okay. However, the question always is, to what do I devote my imagination? To what do I devote my imagination? The imagination can never be constrained. By definition, the imagination is free of all constraints. The imagination is free. But the imagination can enter a world full of constraints and say, this is where I have to apply my imagination. Muhammad Yunus ki kahani suni hai. Muhammad Yunus was this banker from Bangladesh. Have you heard his story? So he started this thing called microfinance. So he said, we bankers, billions of dollars, billions of loans, interest rates, this, that, and the other. And he said, well, how can the idea of lending and banking be made useful to that lady who's looking for the next meal for tomorrow? How can it be done? So he puts his imagination at work, and he invents the idea of microfinance. And he says, if I get 5 ladies together and I give them 10 rupees, and I ask them to return these 10 rupees with 1 more rupee every month. Okay, just 1 more rupee every month. And all of them take the responsibility of doing it together. then they will be able to make use of this 10 rupees. And there will be a discipline in the use of this 10 rupees. So he developed this whole notion of microfinance, and the Grameen Bank, which became so big and so successful and has been responsible for lifting millions of people out of poverty in Bangladesh, was his imagination being applied to highly constrained circumstances. But the imagination is always free. So that's my take on the imagination. Okay?
Any other? Okay. Introduce yourself this time. Okay. We'll let it.
Chalo, koi baat nahi.
My name is
Change your name and then you can say speaker.
My name is Lalit, and another question is, it's not that the caliber, but then do you remember your first project as an architect?
Yes.
What was it?
It was a design of a house for my sister. That's how it always starts.
The charity always begins at home.
Yeah, nobody else trusts you at that time. Yeah.
Okay. No more. That's it. Anyone else? All right. Thank you so much. Now I request Professor Sudarshan, the Dean of the School of Government and Public Policy, to say a few words.
Yes. Well, thank you very much.
We have met before.
Yes, I came because of long associations. I mean, I don't know Ashok all that well, but his brother Rajiv Lall is a very dear friend of mine. And Ashok's wife I know a little better, I know because of Meena Chembam and Siti. No, I just, there is a slot for, if the registrar had been here, he'd have sort of read something like a riot act to you about discipline, zero tolerance of ragging, no drugs and so on. Fortunately, I'm not the registrar, I don't have to say all that. But I'll just take off from what Ashok said. He built a house for his sister. Now, one of the books I'd like all of you to read is a biography of a philosopher called Wittgenstein by a man called Ray Monk.
Yes.
And in that biography, he describes how Wittgenstein, with great attention to detail, built a house for his sister. And designed the door latches for the house. Yes, and everything, right? So there is greatness that's associated with people who build houses for their sisters. And the other point when he was speaking came to me was I kind of had a very extensive education, educated in 5 universities, like the sort of an academic equivalent of the Idle Rich. I was in 3 years in Oxford, 6 years in Cambridge, and so on. And I came to work in an organization called the Ford Foundation in Delhi. And the first thing that struck me was the building of the Ford Foundation. It's made with granite, but it's granite that doesn't have any ferrous oxide, no iron in it. So it doesn't have, stains. So obviously somebody's paid attention to that detail to get the stones quarried from somewhere. While I was working there, and then I moved on to the UNDP next door, which is built by the same architect, Joseph Stein. The Ford Foundation wanted some extra space, so they connected the whole building was the Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation gifted part of it to the United Nations, rent-free. So the UN occupies what was the working space in the building. And now the Ford Foundation office is what was the guest house. So when I worked there, I had an attached bathtub and a shower next in my office because it was meant to be a guest house, and there was a swimming pool. And so they built a thing connecting the guest house and the swimming pool structure, a kind of a corridor in which we got a few offices.
Well-kept secret, the swimming pool.
Yeah, and no, what struck me was Stein was a very old man when he came along, and he agreed that this could be done, and it got done. But then I used to watch him. After this was built, he wanted some trees. So when you look out of the window in this corridor office, you will see some trees, some green, and he had them planted. They are the Ashoka tree that goes straight, right? And he would come every day, this old man, and straighten the plant.
Sounds like it is.
I mean, he'd come every day and go down on his knees and adjust the verticality of this plant as it's growing. Now, so to me that sort of exemplified what architecture could be all about. I mean, it's not something very grand. It's this attempt, and the only other person who struck me in the same way was I worked in Jakarta, and in the house we had a kind of a fish pond of some kind, decorative, which had these colored pebbles, different stones of different colors, and I found that the gardener would come at about 4 or 5 in the morning and pick up each of these pebbles, remove the silt on them, and put them back. I mean, so when people do that, you kind of feel, this is what it's all about. Paying attention to minor, not because somebody has asked him to do it, somebody will pay him to do it or praise him, nothing. It is for itself, right? And so what we heard now from Ashok is this. I mean, to get that kind of, to be in a meditative state, I love that contrast of the Advaitic austerity with the grandeur of Vishnu. But equally, at the same time, if you go to a Vishnu temple, particularly in the south, there are 2 dimensions of divinity that will hit you because of the processes in the temple. One is the greatness, the awesomeness of, the Raja, who has to be, treated like enormous divinity, beyond human comprehension, something great, and the other. And at the same time, there's a certain intimacy. I mean, one is in the theology, they call it paratva. The other is saulabhya, which is intimacy. And the combination of the same, I mean, the same thing can be both, right? And so that's part of this, we struggle to see the 2 objects together. You see the one, you see the other, you see the one, but both are in there, right? So it's a great talk, and I think it was a wonderful, inspiring start for this new school. And my school has been, this is the 7th year. It's been I've been here 6 years in public policy, and there's a lot of links, of course, between what all of you would be studying and the concerns of public policy. And one of the nice things about this university is that we can, connect and not put in silos and different departments with different spaces, and we are all mingling and mixed up. So that's a good thing. And so, so I won't say what the registrar would have said, but in his remarks, I just wanted to say I'm very pleased to have heard you and to be here. I must also mention that one of the finest talks that the public policy school had was from Rajiv Lall. So, it's another kind of lecture. But so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Yeah, I just want to add that the word that kind of kept coming to my mind, both when you were speaking and then when later you were speaking, was the question of care, I guess. Right? I mean, architecture is a form of care, caring for the environment and all of that. So thank you. Very inspiring, Professor Lall, as always. We have Esther, who is going to give you the old stamps.
Present.
Yes.
Oh, no.
We have we have a little presentation for you before that. So we're going to, there's a little ritual that we have here at JGU. So
No, let me explain the rituals. This is Rajkumar.
Yeah.
He went to Oxford, and all Oxford colleges have scarves.
Right.
So everyone in Oxford wears a scarf. But the quality of the Oxford scarf is not very good. It's kind of rough, thin wool. And so Raj wanted the Oxford scarf, as it were, here, but he wanted it to be really nice. He wanted it to be functional as well, and warm in winter. So it's in 2 layers, and he found somebody who makes this, and in Sonipat, and so, and it's got all the colors of the different schools in it. But he won't be satisfied if you just gifted the scarf. He's from Kanyakumari, and in South India, when you have an honored guest, you have to drape them with, Ponnadai it's called in Tamil, which really means a golden brocade, but it doesn't matter, but the act of draping is the important thing. So not only should you be given the scarf, but Jaideep has to
drape it on top. Fine, I will do that.
Before we are draping, since I'm an academic, I have to say a few words. Academics just have to chatter, they can't stop it. I also want to thank you very much for your talk, and I think we really benefited from something that was a biographical talk, but in a very interesting way, because you shared your insights through your life. And that is very fascinating, because most people talk about the stations of their life, but you're sharing your insights, and that you summed up in these kind of 3 steps. And what I should mention to the students also, your recognition, your realization came much later, not at the time that you were taught. And I think you should keep this in mind, because when you look at this now, what you learned and who were chosen as models, these were all modernists, which was so much part of the propaganda, I should say, of the ideology of most architecture schools. And then when you came back to India, you contrasted that, but they might as well have taken other architects, from the past, for instance, and contrast that. So you have that kind of huge discrepancy. So I think whatever you learn and see in the school, listen to it and take it in, but then make up your mind. Maybe the realization will come much, much later, 10, 20, 30, 40 years later. But even at the time, think of alternatives. Because otherwise we have too much standardization, which is also the danger of architecture schools, that even all the buildings, all the designs end up looking the same. So I hope you don't just follow what you see, but you break away from that as well. So with these words, thank you again for this fascinating talk.